This is the Collector Car Podcast, the home for the auto enthusiast. Join Greg Stanley as he applies over 25 years of insights and analytical experience to the collector car market. He will interview the experts and throw in some fun stuff as well.
Hey, it's Greg Stanley. If you're listening to this podcast, you know I love everything automotive. This passion has expanded to include being a car specialist consultant for RM Sotheby's. So if you need assistance buying or consigning a collector car at any one of our online or live auctions, including Scottsdale, Amelia Island, or Monterey, you can reach one of our car specialists at rmsotheby's.com, or you can email me directly at gstanley@rmsotheby's.com. Metron Garage is a company designing unique garages, condos, and other structures specifically for the auto enthusiast. They've got 8 models to choose from, including 2-story options, which I think is super cool, all with a very modern look and feel to them. And they come in all sizes, and they're fully customizable. You can check out them today and start speccing your own ultimate garage at metrongarage.com, where you can request a catalog or talk to someone to learn more. So be sure to check it out. I just want to give a quick thanks to Euro Classics for sponsoring this episode. Euro Classics is all about collector cars, from servicing your new BMW M5 to prepping your Porsche for the racetrack to executing a total restoration on your favorite classic. They do it all from routine maintenance to performance upgrades to appraisals and everything in between. You can learn more about its owner, Dale Oaks, by listening to episode number 65 of this podcast. And you can find Euro Classics in the Kentucky, Ohio, Indiana service area and online at euroclassics.com. Classics, CLASSIX.com. Welcome back to the Collector Car Podcast. Hey, it's Greg Stanley, and I'm extremely excited to have Mr. Bruce Meyer on the call today. Bruce, how you doing today?
Excellent. Beautiful California day.
It's actually a beautiful Cincinnati day today in Ohio. So, yeah, I'm very happy to have you on because I know you're kind of the car guy's car guy or car gal's car guy. You know, I mean, you're in it deep. You're in it for a lifetime. You're in it because of your passion for these cars. I know that you had a lot to do with, getting the Peterson Museum up and running and making hot rods, more mainstream kind of collectible, understanding, honoring the history of the hot rods. But could you give us just like the Bruce Meyer 101? I know that's a big thing to ask, but a couple bullet points as far as how you're involved in the car world today.
Sure. Well, I'm still very involved in the Peterson. You're talking today now, right?
Yep, today.
Not my misguided ute.
No.
So today I'm very involved with the Peterson and just enjoying every car activity that I can attend and participate in. So I'm active. I love the drive. At my ripe old age, I realized that as much as I love automobiles, the people are what really make it special. And, seeing you at Amelia Island and so many of our mutual friends, it's really about the people. It's enjoying a mutual passion with people that you enjoy and that share that love.
Yeah, I totally agree. And sometimes people ask, well, will live auctions ever disappear? And I'm like, no, they won't, because of the people aspect of it. People love getting together. They love looking at cool cars. Maybe we'll buy one, maybe we won't, maybe we'll sell one. But it's just that whole environment and the whole, 2-3 day celebration of the automobile and whatever the event might be that people really enjoy, correct?
Great energy, lots of stories, sharing, a love of a particular car, as it goes across the blocks, and just seeing the crowd's reaction, so you kind of get a feeling for the market, so to speak. Although I'm not a seller, it's certainly a great place, a great bellwether, kind of what's hot and what's not.
Yes, for sure. And like you said, you are not a seller, and I did want you on to kind of cover your ultimate garage, which I like asking car experts who are known car experts about what would be in their ultimate garage, because a lot of times, and you're specifically known for some very specific cars in your collection, what are those 10 cars? What might be something that kind of would catch our listeners off guard? I remember I had Donald Osborne on, and I was expecting, Alphas and Italian and all this kind of stuff, and the last car he picked was a Hypo Mustang, and that one caught me off guard and a couple of my listeners as well. So it's just kind of a fun exercise. I'm guessing some of your ultimate cars are in your current garage. I might be wrong on that.
Nope, you're right. Pretty much all. I've been doing this for a long time, at least 60 years of passion. And my ultimate garage, the first car I bought was a Gullwing, so that would have to be, one of those cars. It's a global car. It's marketable in Europe or Japan as it is in the U.S. It's not just like a a 409 Chevy, so to speak. It's a global car, and I would put that at the top of any list.
Now, is that any Gullwing, or are you specific to like the alloy body ones, or just
well,
any?
Mine is a steel-bodied Rudge wheel car, Rudge wheels from the factory. That satisfies my itch, so to speak.
Okay.
You get an alloy car. Other than a few little cues, you just can't tell the difference. So
Right.
for me, it's not worth the delta of of the price. It's just it's seriously more expensive and more fragile, and nobody knows the difference. So I would say a steel Gullwing, Rudge wheels would be great if you can, but if you can't, that's fine too.
Right. Okay. Well, that was an easy one. What else is on your list?
Okay, so I'm a patriot, so I would have to have an American car, at least one, and I consider the Cobra an American car, even though it's an English body and English chassis. A Cobra, definitely belongs in my garage. I have a Cobra. I've been driving Cobras since 1966, actually. So I've never been without one, and I just love those cars. It gives the impression that you're going really, really fast, makes lots of noise, and by today's standards, you're just rolling along. It's nothing. You're not going to get it's not like warp speed super hyper cars, so Cobra would be in there for sure.
Now, isn't your Cobra one of the very first ones?
It was just on the cover of Road and Track, so it was every Cobra is known by its CSX number, and CSX is, Carroll Shelby Export or Experimental, just depends on who you talk to. So mine is CSX 2001. Shelby's own personal prototype was CSX 2000, so mine was the very first production car and the very first Cobra to actually participate in a race, and then it went to Europe, and I bought it, close to 20 years ago in Europe, and I love that car. I drive it a lot and I enjoy it, so that's definitely one that's in there.
And that's a little 260 leaf spring car, is that right?
It's early, yeah. It started with a 260, but almost as soon as it was made, the 289 came out, and Ed Hugas really put it together, and he was back in Pittsburgh, and he put in a 289. So it really ran it's other than the first few months, it ran with a 289. And it's an interesting story, and I don't know how much time you have for this, but basically it's a 289 now that has been upgraded to FIA standards, specs. It was sold to a wealthy Frenchman, and he wanted an FIA car, so he took it to Ford Racing of Europe, and they put the wider rear wings on, or fenders, depending on which side of the pond you, and
right.
and mags and a full FIA, Weber competition engine, and rack and pinion. They changed it to rack and pinion in 1964. So it's everything I ever wanted in a Cobra.
Oh, wow, that's awesome. And it's black, so you can't hurt. That doesn't hurt, right?
No, I love it. I mean, it checks every box for me. I bought a Cobra in '65, and then my roommate went out and bought a brand new big block dark green Cobra in '66, and I always thought just no headrest, no side pipes, just a snaky looking thing, and I've always thought that would be a fun thing to have, but then at the end of the day, I just don't have the room, or I just don't need extra stuff that I don't drive, so I've never gotten that car, but just a small block works for me really well.
Okay, all right, well, let's move on to the next car, and give me a heads up when one of these is not in your garage, okay?
Okay. Well, so I over all the years, I've just bought one car at a time, not 3 cars in a year. I've just picked off cars that really, really mean something to me. And I've had a Cobra since the '60s, but this other one I bought more recently, then sold the one that I had. So I think I have every one of my cars that I love in my garage except one, and I'll just throw that in right now, and that's a Scarab.
Ooh, yeah.
Reventlow Scarab. That, to me, that just checks every single box. First of all, it was built by hot rodders, 100%. Phil Remington and Traco did the engine, and it was all American, a pure hot rod effort. Lance Reventlow, American, wanted an American sports car that would compete with the European cars, and not only did it compete, but it won. So that's a car that I've just admired since the late 50s when it came out. I've just been such a fan of that, and there's only 3 of them. And I don't see one of those in my garage anytime soon, because you've got 3, serious, passionate collectors. You've got Miles Collier, Rob Walton, and John Mozart. Those 3 gentlemen have the 3 Cobra Scarabs, and they're not. I don't think they're going anywhere real soon. So
now, we did have a recreation at our Elkhart sale. Did you look at that one by any chance?
Do you know what's really interesting? Because we could spend a whole hour on replicas and continuation, or in the spirit of. Don Orozco, who owned Rob Walton's Cobra before Rob, had parts. He'd collected parts. He had a great, terrific shop, and he was very clever. He took little pieces off this car and that car. So he built a recreation, which would have been the only recreation I think that I would even consider, because it had some Scarab parts on it, just a hint of DNA. But I just couldn't bring myself around to it, because I think once you go down that slippery slope, and by the way, there are Cobras made now that are identical, aluminum bodied, everything identical to the old ones, and maybe better in a way. And they're a tenth the price.
Sure.
But I think once you have to explain a car, whether it's a new body or a new chassis or a continuation, I think it has a tendency to taint your current stable, so to speak. So there have been a couple of really, really faithful reproduction Scarabs, which I've been tempted, but I just can't let myself go down that slope.
It's got to be one of the 3.
It's got to be one of the 3, and I'm very happy just to see those. All 3 of these guys use their cars, enjoy their cars, and share their cars. So I'm happy just to share it with them. You don't have to own everything, and we all know, at least I know now, I'm 80 years old, and you can kind of see the end of this great journey, and you realize you don't take any of this with you. You're just right. Custodian. So, knowing that your favorites are in good hands, plenty cool, and that's good enough for me.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's a great way to enjoy it through your buddies. So that's a
and all these guys, all 3 of those guys are friends of mine and use them. And John Mozart takes his in the Colorado Grand. Rob races his personally. Rob Walton is a real first-class driver. I mean, he is professional grade driver, and Miles brings his out and lets people drive him and enjoy him. So they're in good hands. It's not like they're salted away and nobody can enjoy them. So I'm happy with that.
Yeah, all right.
But that would be, if they made enough of them, or I could get my hands on one, that would be right there in my garage.
Okay. Well, let's go through the rest of the list here and see if maybe
sure.
Maybe it'll prompt maybe one other elusive car, but we'll see. All right, what's next?
Okay, so let me just think. I wouldn't consider myself a Ferrari guy, but I've got a couple Ferraris that I just drive and enjoy, and one of them is a 250 short wheelbase Berlinetta, 1961, and our fraternity advisor when I was at Berkeley had a short wheelbase Berlinetta, and he took me for a ride in it, and that was in 1962, and I'd always wanted one. So it wasn't until I turned 60 that this was my 60th birthday present to myself. So I bought a 250 short wheelbase Berlinetta, and I think they're wonderful cars. They're the penultimate GT car, the GTO being the ultimate, and you don't need headsets or pelters to converse in one. My wife and I have taken it on the Colorado Grand. We drive it around town. It's a pleasure to drive, and aggressive to look at, and they also won a lot of significant races. So I've been tending more towards competition cars, just in my old age, so to speak. So a 250 short wheelbase is in there.
Okay. Yep.
And also the car that I've currently have had the longest is a 275 GTB 4-cam, a 1967. I bought it in 1970, so I've had it 52 years. And to me, that for a front engine V12 good looking thing, I don't think you can do much better than a 275 GTB, and the GTB4 was kind of the ultimate, spec, so to speak, and great car. I consider myself more a Porsche person than anything, and when I drive that 4-cam, it feels like a Porsche. It feels you're very at one with the car. It's small. It's not like you're driving a big car. So 275 GTB.
Now, what color is that car?
Its original paint is on the car. It's a fly yellow, they called it. Bright yellow.
Sure. Yeah.
So I saw that car. It was owned by a very wealthy gentleman here in Beverly Hills named Bill Doheny. And his family owned Union Oil Company, Union 76, and he had race cars, and they were all number 76. And so he bought this car brand new in 1967. I saw the car. It had to be like my son seeing his first Countach or something. To me, that was the most beautiful car I'd ever seen, bright yellow, and I'd never seen a car that color. So to make a long story short, I was able to buy that from him in 1970. And at the same time, a GTO was less money.
Oh no!
There was I paid a little over $10,500 for the 4-cam, and there was a GTO which is now owned by Tom Price that was for sale right here in Beverly Hills for $8,500. So
oh my goodness!
It's just you just have to have the knowledge. You have to know what to buy. If you're thinking investment now, whether my 4-cam is worth 10,000 or 10 million doesn't matter to me because I'm not a seller. So it doesn't matter if it's a GTO or a 4-cam, although it'd be plenty cool if it were a GTO.
Yeah, it's amazing when you look back on what could have been, but at least you have that car in your garage, right?
Yeah, no complaints. I've got no complaints, and again, I drive them. So let's see. What is that about?
That's number 5.
Number 5. Okay, so I think everybody should have a 32 Ford. And that just goes back to my hot rod roots. That to me, that just hot rods are important, and they've been underappreciated for a lot of years. And hot rods were built by hot rodders, and they were kind of, fed my passion for old cars. So you need a 32 Ford hot rod of some kind, whether it's a roadster or a coupe or Fayette, and whatever it is. I think that's pretty important, and I drive mine thousands of miles. I just enjoy it, and I enjoy the image, and people love that car. So 32 Ford.
Now, what's the appropriate hot rod period? Like, is yours hot rodded per 1952 or something like that, or is it later?
That's a really good question. Okay, so I have. If it was appropriate in the 50s, it would have a Ford flathead engine in it. Those were really kind of like 40s and 50s. And then in mid-50s, the Chevy small block came out, and everybody went to that. So I have flathead, Arden head, and small block Chevy, and a big block Chevy. I think the engine of choice, you just can't beat a small block Chevy engine. Whether it's a 327 or a 350, they're just, you can't hurt them. They don't cost a lot to fix. You can get a ton of power out of them. So, all my hot rods have what I call 3 pedals. They're stick shift.
Yep.
That to me, is really important. So,
how fast is that Arden head one compared to the Chevy?
Not fast at all. This is a car that was built for me by SoCal Speed Shop. It was actually a hot rod that was done in the 50s and 60s, and then a guy put an Arden in it, I want to say in maybe the 70s, and it didn't do it right. So when I got it, we just started all over again. But it's an original Arden with an original Scott blower on it, and it looks the business. But I'm so afraid that I'm going to hurt that engine. I drive it slowly, and frankly, it's not that fast.
Right,
Nothing as fast as a small block Chevy. Now, that being said, Don Ferguson, they are reproducing Arden heads, and guys that have those cars with the new Arden head setup, they've made some improvements, and in the oiling system and just the metallurgy and so forth, they can get a heap of power out of those things. So mine's an original Arden, but the new Ardens are right up there. They keep up with traffic, and they've set some records at Bonneville right there with the small block Chevy. So I would say the new Arden heads, which are available, are a lot stronger than the ones I have.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, that's a nice
32 Ford.
32 Ford. Okay.
So, and next would be just on, as it comes to mind, Porsches, and there are a couple Porsches that I think are really important. One would be a 356, and whether it's an A, B, or C doesn't matter. But I prefer the A models. I have a 58 Speedster and a little 57 Outlaw Coupe that I built about 35 years ago, before they were outlaws. We did all the go fast, roll bar, gas tank through the hood, louvered rear deck, and so forth. But I built that a lot of years ago. Scott Banowski at Hot Rods and Hobbies did that for me, and it looks like it was done yesterday. And now all the kind of go fast guys are trending in that direction. But I would say a nice 356. You can't do any better. It's a great image. They're wonderful driving cars, not a lot of money, and if you hurt an engine, rebuilding it is not, doesn't take you out of the game. So 356. And then I would, on top of that, to go to a 911, I have only air-cooled cars, which means like 97, 98. I have a 96 turbo, but I like the 73 RS, which was a 1 year only in 73, and Porsche decided they were going to go racing, because up until that they were all limited and they didn't really have a homologated car. So they came out and they built the 73 RS. They needed 500. They thought, well, we'll do 500 and that'll homologate the car. Well, the demand was so strong, not in America because you couldn't bring them in at that point, or they weren't brought over here. They ended up making about 1,500. So they made a 500, then they made another 500, and they made another 500. So the first series are the most desirable, but that doesn't. Any RS is a nice car. It's a 2.7 engine, a little bigger than the 911s off the shelf at that period, and they're usually outfitted with sport seats or some kind of lightweight seat. And they're just wonderful cars. To me, it just speaks 911.
And it has that great ducktail spoiler, doesn't it?
It does. It has a ducktail spoiler. The one I have is actually an RSH, which is a real rare thing. When they first came out with the RSs, to homologate them, people had to spec whether it was a lightweight or a touring. And then only 17 came out RSH or kind of ultra lightweight homologation cars. So I have a homologation car, and I was lucky to get that. And it's my most recent purchase, and I purchased it private tree through RM.
Yeah, that's right. I saw the car and you at Scottsdale, right?
In Scottsdale. So I had an RS Touring for 30 years. And, white with the blue, and I loved the car. I never, ever thought about ever selling it or moving it on. And then I saw that RSH that you had, and I thought, oh, my God. So I did a little homework on it and talked to the fellow that restored it. And the prior owner was John McCaw, who I think very highly of. And so I bought it. And we'll sell the RS,
right,
which Bruce Canepa is doing now, I think. Hopefully. So I would say, that, and then if you have like the itch for something really fun, you would go with a a RUF, which is RUF. Some people pronounce it rough, but it's actually pronounced RUF. And he came out with a car called the CTR, and it's referred to as the Yellowbird. And so that is probably the most thrilling air-cooled 911 ride you can get. And that's a twin turbocharged, 500 horsepower rear-wheel drive, 5-speed earthshaker. So, that's just if you have little room in the garage and you have time, room to expand it, I would say a Yellowbird would be really cool.
Now, is that one that makes it into your ultimate garage?
Well, let me see. Let me just think. I've got a couple more, right?
Yeah, you've got the 73 was number 8.
And okay, and so 9. Well, can I? Well, maybe I'll do 11. But anyways, there's a couple that I think that are important. One, I grew up on classic cars, and always just thought about having a Duesenberg. And so in the 80s, I bought a Duesenberg, and it was restored by Randy Ema, and we took it up to Pebble Beach, and we won our class at Pebble. And it's just part of that Americana fiber that runs through me. It's an all-American car. People think it's German, but the Duesenberg brothers were American, and they built 4EL Cord, the ultimate American luxury car in the late 20s, the roaring 20s. So if you have room and you can afford it, a Duesenberg would, and I do have a beautiful one-off Duesenberg built for Colonel McCormick, he owned the Chicago Tribune, McCormick Place in Chicago. So I've had that car for, 15 years, maybe more, but I love that car. It's just a big honkin' classic, and it's not as much fun to drive as a 356, but it's every bit as much fun to look at, and they do drive well. I mean, they're fast, for a 1929 car. In the 20s, late 20s, I mean, the money was flowing, and you had the Gatsby era and all the wealthy families. So E.L. Cord decided he was going to build a car for the time, and it was the car for the moment. But then as soon as he got it going in late 20s, along came the Depression, and that kind of shut that concept down.
Yeah, and I did an episode that was the fastest car from every decade. And even though all the Duesenbergs were made in 1929, they actually sold and were titled in, as you know, 30, 31, 32. And so it's the only car that is the fastest car for 2 decades. It's for 1920s and 1930s, which is mind-blowing when you think about it.
It really is an amazing car, and hydraulic brakes, and just a cool thing. So I think it's important. So I throw a Duesenberg in there, and then the other car, which I'm pretty new. I mean, I've had this car probably more than 10 years. Is a Bentley, an early Bentley. Mine's a 4.5 liter. It's a blower without a blower, so to speak. People look at it and say, "Oh, is that a blower Bentley?" It looks like a blower Bentley, but it doesn't have that big lump on the front that adds about $5 million to the price. But it's a 4.5 liter Bentley, and they're wonderful driving cars. And we've toured Europe in it. We've done 4 North American tours in it. And it's just a great car to drive. So I would say if you got room, squeeze a Bentley in there. So I guess that's 11 cars.
Actually, that's 10, 11 if we count the Yellowbird. Did you want to go one more?
Yeah, I could even go another one.
Okay.
I've got a couple Corvettes, both which ran Le Mans, and for me, I would say in the last 25 years, I've gained to realize how important the 24-hour race is at Le Mans. And so we have a couple Corvettes. I have a C6R, which is a 2008, and it won Le Mans in 2009. And I've got a 1960 Briggs Cunningham Corvette.
Which number? Do you have number 1, 2, or 3?
2. 2, and
okay.
I've had it for a really long time. It's all credit to a fellow named Mike Pillsbury, who restored it, and I mean, he gets all the credit, and I'm just enjoying that car. We took it and we ran it at Goodwood, and I love taking it out. It's a pretty thing, white with the blue stripes, And I think now that all three are together, it's going to be, they're going to try and do something to bring the three of them together again, which would be pretty cool.
For our listeners, we did review with Kevin McKay the number 3 car that was found that we auctioned off, and it's now being restored by Kevin. So hopefully, we'll see all 3 cars back at Le Mans at some point.
Right. Well, actually, the one you did was number 1.
Number 1, that's right. Yep.
And Chip Miller has the number 3 car. I mean, I'm not convinced which car is which, to be honest with you, because you look at the Le Mans papers, and that doesn't agree with the Corvette experts. So I've just kind of stayed clear of that whole thing. But we know one thing: whoever has number 1, and I have number 2, and a new buyer just bought number 3 now. They are the 3 Corvettes. Which one is which could be debated, but I won't go.
Sure. Yeah.
So I love the Corvettes, and I also am a big fan of Bizzarrini.
Yes.
And Bizzarrini is not a well-known manufacturer, so to speak, but the man was amazing, and should be. That's another person he's underappreciated what he has brought to the world of racing and to the automobile. I mean, he is the father of the Ferrari GTO. He is a race car savant from a very early age. I mean, he went to technical school and then was hired by Alfa, and then hired away by Ferrari, and was at Ferrari in the late 50s and early 60s, and then they had the Palace Revolt, and he left and went with ATS. And he's had an amazing career, but wherever he has been, he has changed the automotive world. I mean, he is a very special human being, and I think that as time goes on, he will be recognized as one of the all-time greats, right there with Enzo and Ferdinand, and the great car branch, and Henry. So he is that important. I just don't think people have come to know enough about him. But the car that I have was his Le Mans car, and it is so technically advanced for 1965. It's just, you could just start a whole list of firsts on that car, including the slab sides. Every race car now has slab sides. This was the very first. It has kind of a cam tail, very low, profile. It was 190 miles an hour down the straights at Le Mans. I mean, he drove the car. He drove the car himself from Laverno to Le Mans. He had two drivers drive it, won their class, and then he drove it home. So it's just, it's got a Chevy engine in it, 327 with 4 Webers.
Yeah, and I saw your video you did with Jay Leno for his Garage Series on YouTube. You gave a nice overview of that car. Now, I have to ask, how difficult is that thing to get in and out of?
Okay. So they didn't show us getting in and out of it, did it?
I was wondering.
We were either in it. Yeah, it's, listen, my son can just hop right in. I can't. It takes me a little longer to kind of, wind myself up and unwind myself, but it's pretty low, and it's not built for easy entry or exit, but once you're in it, it's pretty darn comfortable, and you're just like laying down because the car is so low.
Yeah,
but it is a special car, and it just makes a divine sound. And Jay did a little video on it, and there's also another one. If you just put Bruce Meyer Bizzarrini or something like that, it comes up on YouTube. But they did a little story on that car. But what I loved about Jay's comments were it was his favorite car. I mean, I was just, godsmacked when he said that this was one. Maybe he said it's his favorite or one of his favorites, but Jay's a huge fan of this car. And unfortunately, the day that he drove it, I think there were fires going on in the mountains, and he couldn't take it up in the mountains. But it's an impressive car, just gobs of power and great sound, and movie star good look. So I'm a big fan of Bizzarrini. So I'd like to throw that in there.
Yeah, okay. No, that's a great Ultimate Garage. I do want to revisit one of the cars you mentioned. You mentioned your Speedster. Now, isn't that an XD McQueen car?
So I wish it were. So
sounds like a no.
There is an XD McQueen car, and I did own it. And the one I have now is an identical twin. If they were parked right next to each other, nobody would be able to tell the difference. So it's a black 58 Speedster, super Speedster with Rudge wheels. And Steve bought his car brand new in 58, and then he continued to race it. And then he sold it, and it found its way to me. I bought it in 1968, so it was about, 10 years old. And I had it for about, probably, maybe I bought it in 67. I sold back to him like in the mid-70s. I loved that car, and he came out and saw it. It's a long story. Somebody told him that I had it. He said, "Oh, he couldn't have my car." And so Steve came out and inspected the car, realized it was his, and then he just started working on me to buy it back. And I really didn't want to sell it. I liked the car. My wife says, "Don't you sell that car. You love that car." And so, make a long story short, I did sell it back to him. I thought that was the right thing to do, and he promised me that if he ever sold it, it would come back to me. And of course, unfortunately, he passed. And now his son Chad has it, and I think it's probably the coolest automotive thing left in the McQueen family. And I don't think they'll ever sell it, nor will I ever get my hands. So I just went off right after I sold it to him. I bought another one, which was about 30 years ago or something like that, maybe more, maybe 40 years ago. I've had this little black one. So, it's identical to Steve's, but it's not Steve's, and that makes it about 1/10 the price of Steve's. But I've really never gone at this, acquisition thing about money or, trying to make a deal and sell it and that type of stuff. I'm not a seller, and I've probably overpaid for every car I've ever gotten, but I've just tried to buy, the ultimate spec or the one that won the race or whatever. I just think, you got to pay up. I say buy the very best and cry only once.
Yeah.
That's what I live by.
Now, there is a cool picture of you and Steve McQueen in a black Speedster, and I think you had bell bottoms on. So was that when you bought the car, or was that when you sold the car?
That's when I sold it back to him.
Yeah, that
was in the mid-'70s, and oh, gosh. And my wife took that picture. The dog kind of sniffing my crotch there. And but that was out in Malibu at Steve's home, and he was married to Allie McGraw. And I'd spent a lot of time racing motorcycles in my youth. And back then they weren't lightweight motorcycles. They were big, heavy, clunker, Matchless and Triumph and that type of stuff. But, we had a lot to talk about because he raced when I was racing, but of course he and the Eakins brothers were, expert front runners, and I was just toddling along in the back. But we talked about motorcycles, we talked about cars, and then I was pretty well talked out after a couple beers. Steve just loved to talk about cars and motorcycles and drink beers, and I just, I was there for probably an hour and a half, and my wife Raylene was in there with Allie, and so they decided that they were going to cook up some dinner for us, and so she said, Allie came out, you want to stay for dinner? Of course, I just didn't have anything more to talk to Steve about. I said, no, I think we got to kind of have to run along. I remember the look on my wife's face like, you're really going to run along right when they invite us for dinner? But anyways, I just can remember that little detail of the afternoon.
Did he have like his brown Lusso there at the time, or
he had two Mercedes in the garage, a 6.3 sedan and a 3.5 sedan.
Okay.
I mean, a 3.5 convertible, excuse me. And, both cool cars, Obviously, the 3.5 was Allie's, and he drove the 6.3, which was a high-performance Mercedes at the time.
Yeah, wow.
Right.
Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, and I appreciate you sharing your Ultimate Garage. We did kind of jump into the Ultimate Garage before I could hear all the stuff you're doing today in the automotive world. So let's go back a little bit. Could you tell us a little bit about what you're up to today?
Sure. Like this afternoon.
Well, I know what you're doing right now.
Okay, yeah, I'm just hanging out. So, you know, I just want to have fun. I'm fortunate that my family's and my son and my nephew run the business part of my world, and I, as I say, very involved. I'm vice chairman of the Peterson. So, Bob Peterson was a very good friend of mine, a neighbor, and we were in this group called YPO, which is a professional group together. And we were in that, and then he found that building and just kind of brought me in. And so I was the founding chair, chaired it for 10 years and kind of got it going and kept it going. So I still feel very aligned with the Peterson, but we have the most amazing executive staff at the Peterson with, Terry Cargis, our executive director, and Michael Bodell, who's his right hand and maybe left and right sometimes. He and Michael run that place so magnificently, and right now we've got a James Bond display, but we've had fabulous exhibits there, world-class exhibits. Juan Gonzalez gave us a selection of his Formula One cars, which are amazing. And Juan is a new member of our board. He owns Mission Foods. But we just have a fabulous board with Greg Penske and Bobby Rahal and Chip Connor and just rock stars guided by Richard Varner, who runs Moto America. So the Peterson has never been on more solid ground. Great exhibits. So I spent a lot of time there. We have a group called the Checkered Flag 200. It was a club that I started 25 years ago, and so I'm still active in that and chair that and plan events. And so the Peterson takes up a fair hunk of my time, and then my own garage takes up a fair hunk, and then I'm involved with a bunch of charities. I'm Children's Hospital. I'm on a couple hospital boards, and then we started a group called the CHP 1199 Foundation, which is a California Highway Patrol charitable foundation, and I spend a fair amount of time on that. It was started by a fellow named Bob Weinberg. It was a friend of mine. He started it, and then he passed away, and we decided we were going to formalize it, so we put together a board after he died, and there were about 5 of us that kind of founded it and got it going, and so I'm pretty involved in that. That's been probably 25 years. And then I'm involved civically. I don't know what I do, but my day is packed. I go to bed late at night and early in the morning, 12:01, and get up early and just keep going. I wish there was no internet. The internet takes way too much time. Oh my God, the emails and all that.
There is one question I do have for you related to the Peterson. You were really a driving force behind bringing hot rods into the collector mainstream. I don't know a better way to put it, but where they were recognized by Pebble Beach, they're accepted more as investment grade if they have the right type of history, just really made them more than they were before. Can you speak a little bit to why or how you felt the motivation to do that? I know you're a hot rodder at heart, which I know is part of it, right?
Well, so I grew up in a very modest, family, and my parents were products of the Depression, so they realized how important saving money and not running out of money and getting by was. And so cars were not part of anything that they related to. So I just came out, with cars in my DNA, and all I could think about was cars. And they did everything humanly possible to get me focused on anything but cars. So I say now in my later years, you're never too old to have a happy childhood. And that's what I'm doing. I'm just, I think hot rods, well, first of all, hot rodders were, as I mentioned earlier, just super important, whether it was the Cobra or the Scarab or even in Detroit. I mean, hot rodders really built our automotive America. And whether it's fuel injection with Stu Hilborn or Le Mans with Phil Remington, these were all hot rodders, and Travers and Coons, Traco, Parnelli Jones, Dan Gurney, one of my all-time heroes. He's a hot rodder. He raced at Bonneville. And so I just, for so long, I just thought hot rodding, when I was growing up, my parents just thought of hot rodding as the equivalent of the Hells Angels on four wheels,
Right.
They just thought that there was no greater waste of energy, resources, or time. And so they did everything they could to, steer me away. But it's a very underappreciated art form, and it was so important technologically to, everything we do, whether it's NASCAR or Bonneville. I mean, these are hot rod guys and gals. So about, I want to say this was probably in the late 70s, early 80s, I decided that I bought a hot rod, and that's, almost by accident. Jim Busby had one, and I said, if you ever sell it, let me know. And next day
he called you on it.
Where do I? Yeah, he called me on it. Damn, because I wasn't ready. I didn't even have, it wasn't a lot of money. It was $15,000 for a 32 Ford. So anyways, I bought that, and every time I drove it, I enjoyed it more and more, and I started doing, deep dives into hot rodding and bought the whole run of hot rod magazines and just poured over it and enjoyed it and realized that, my heroes were hot rodders. And so I've been active at Pebble Beach with the Duesenbergs and other, classic kind of cars. But they never had hot rods. And so I started working on the organizers of Pebble Beach, Jules Human and Lauren Tryon. And, I became the world's biggest pest. I was so annoying. Every hot rod article, anything that legitimized hot rods, I would copy and send to them. So I finally, in the Christmas of '96, I got a text from Lauren Tryon that just finally was like, we've had, like, Bruce, just enough already.
Right.
We're going to try this out for 1 year and then just stop, okay? And so I said, great. So he said, we're going to do hot rods in '97, and another, authority and automotive authority and hot rod authority is Ken Gross.
Mm-hmm.
So after I'd heard from Lauren, we got together, and Ken was involved in this early organization of hot rods at Pebble Beach, and still is. He does a lot of the planning for that. But that moment in time, Pebble Beach, 1997, was a pivotal turning point in the image of hot rodding, because can you imagine? Pebble Beach is the high water of classic cars and prestige and everything that's wonderful about the cars and the hobby. And to have hot rods there completely transformed the image of hot rods and hot rodders. But anyways, a Rolls-Royce judge, Rolls-Royce everything. All of a sudden, he decided he wanted a hot rod. Every one of my friends, wanted a hot rod, and all of a sudden they were just everybody. After, but that was after Pebble Beach, okay. But up until Pebble Beach, it was nobody even talked about hot rods. Roger Morrison, his name just came to me. He's a real quality guy and lives in Salina, Kansas. And anyway, so he's had hot rods, and you got Chip Connor with hot rods and Charlie Nierenberg, all the guys that own GTOs. Even Rob Walton has a 32 Ford hot rod. So, I think I've done a pretty good job of infecting all my friends and beyond. So I just think hot rods are that important, and I think there should be a hot rod in every garage. That's definitely in my top 10.
Yeah. Now let me ask you this: what is the next car or segment of car that needs a champion like you to, eventually be, let's say, on Pebble Beach, or just to be accepted more to the mainstream? Is that, JDM cars? Is that cars, the few performance cars we had from the 80s? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I hadn't given it any thought.
Okay.
But I'll be happy to think about it for a moment. I just think Pebble Beach has done first of all, you've got Sandra Button, who she has done an amazing job at maintaining the high standards of Pebble Beach. It's held in as high esteem as it's ever been. But what she has managed to do is to keep it current. And whether it's like, I believe they're doing 901 Porsches, which were the the first 911s. maybe I'm letting the cat out of the bag, but I think that's coming in 2023. She's managed to keep it current. So I just think of my son who's 45, what he likes, and he's a big Porsche guy, and he also grew up with, he had a Typhoon when he was younger.
Yep.
Those are, so I think that there's this group called Radwood.
Yep.
Which I don't see that, Pebble Beach turning into Radwood, but I think there are places like Radwood where you can celebrate things that aren't Packards and Duesenbergs and
right.
Ferraris, so to speak, So I think, under Sandra's care, and I'm sure when she retires, or I hope that somebody will be as open-minded as she is, but you got to keep that event current. Because if it were just, 34 Packards and Duesenbergs and Isadas and Rolls-Royce, nobody would come.
Right.
But, the Ferraris, and they, got involved in Ferraris and custom this, and, Ferraris won Best of Show at Pebble Beach, so John Shirley's car. But you got to keep those shows current, and every show, whether it's, the St. John's, which it used to be Meadowbrook, and Amelia Island, they all have had hot rod classes. And even this year at Amelia, they had hot rod class. So I think people are now really realize that historic hot rods have a place in the real world of cars and in the best collections worldwide. And even Everett Lauman in The Hague, who arguably has one of the finest collections in the world, has a hot rod. Ross Myers, who has an amazing collection of race cars, he probably has the most extensive collection of historic hot rods anywhere.
Wow, okay.
So, and there's a guy you may want to talk to at some point, because he's a really interesting and bright guy and a racer. But, I don't know what the next hot rod is, so to speak, but I think you've got to just, you should know, Greg, because it's your generation.
That's right.
What I should ask you, what do you think is the next, eye opener?
I think it might be another 10 years or so, but I think the really rare factory race cars like the DTMs or the Killer Bees or, stuff that maybe, the quality of the plastic may not been the best because it was the 80s, but it's a super rare, super high performance factory car that, the same qualifications that you look at Porsches in the 60s and Ferraris in the 60s, just move that up a couple decades. I think those are the cars that will be really sought after. Look at the 917s that are at Pebble this year or last year. That was an incredible
and that's
class.
A good point. And, so if I look at, like, every car I've ever had and just look at it, from, year one to today, the cars I'm buying now are race-bred cars or race cars or Le Mans winners. I have a dragster that's the most winning dragster in the history of drag racing. I have Scotty Parker's flat track bike. But I think that competition cars and high-performance cars, there's a place for those. They made so many F40s that if you did an F40 class at Pebble Beach, they would all look the same. They're all red, and maybe one's just
right.
detailed a little better than the other. And I think they're darn important cars. And they may do, like, one of, F40, F50, or GTO F40, F50. They may do a class of some of those, performance cars. But I think performance and race-bred cars are super important.
I agree.
And those, that's the future, in my opinion. I was with a friend of mine, David Pyle, who's a very elegant gentleman and, could basically afford anything he wants. And this last year he bought the 934.5 at Amelia Island. And I don't think he's ever been to a car race, but he realized the importance of it, So I think when you get into racing and, that's going to make a difference.
Well, just like the car you bought, what was it, 73? RSH. You take that
Yep.
to the 1990s with the RSRs or, the rare lightweight cars that are already at $1 million. There's the rarity and the provenance, and, it's a Porsche, that people can relate to. I think those are the cars that will definitely continue to go and be honored and recognized at, the big events in the world. So, well, one thing I like to do at the end of this, and I believe I gave you a heads up, this has been really tough. I play a little game called Keep, Cash, and Crush, and I'm going to give you 3 cars, and you have to pick one to keep forever, one to cash in, and then one, unfortunately, send to the crusher. Now, I know you're a car guy. You can never throw one to the crusher, so it's hypothetical. And if you're having trouble, just tell me number 1, 2, and 3. And I came up with my list before this call. You named each one of the cars in your Ultimate Garage, which I'm like, I should probably switch those out.
Oh, no.
Yeah, but I've decided I'm just going to keep it.
Keep them all.
It's the first time it's happened where someone has picked those cars for his Ultimate Garage. So I'm just going to keep it the way it is. Let's see how you do. So the 3 cars are Mercedes Gullwing, a Porsche Carrera Speedster, and an AC Cobra 289 car. So which one would you keep forever? Which one would you cash in? Which one would you crush?
God.
Or 1, 2, 3.
That's not fair.
I know.
Okay, I'll do. So my favorite car is probably the Cobra, but that's probably the least intrinsic value. So I would probably put that, towards what are the 3? So a Gullwing, a Cobra, and
Carrera Speedster.
Carrera Speedster.
Yeah.
Okay, so the Carrera Speedster is probably it's probably one of the rarest, but the problem is getting people to work on a Carrera. You're talking 4-cam Carrera.
Yes, 4-cam. Yeah.
That's just super rare. But I would probably, are you thinking of investment or just fun of driving it, or
however you define it?
Yeah. Well, if it's fun of driving, I would do Cobra, Gullwing, Carrera Speedster. Importance, in for the future, I think the one brand that just resonates in the future are Porsches.
Yes.
And all the high-tech people, all people with gobs of money, they're all buying up these rare, desirable Porsches. So I think Porsche's probably got the most legs as far as the future goes. And I love the Speedsters. I've had one forever. But with the 4-cam in it, to me, I don't think it adds anything other than complexity for the most part.
Okay.
Rarity and complexity. So in the investment side, maybe the Carrera Speedsters may be number 1, and Cobra number 2, and maybe Gullwings just kind of plod along. I bought my first Gullwing for $4,000 in 1963, and I was with a guy this weekend and said he paid $5,000 for his Gullwing. So they just kind of, they don't go up real fast, they don't go down real fast, they just kind of move along. So I think, as I said earlier, the Gullwing has a world market, so it'll always be worth something. So, boy, those were 3. Why didn't you throw in a F-150 pickup?
I thought about switching it to modern cars, but then I thought you might trash all 3 of them. So
No, you're right. I don't even know I don't even know the modern car stuff. But those were 3 good ones. Those are tough.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining the Collector Car Podcast. What's the best way for our listeners to learn more about either you or the Peterson or whatever you want to share? I would say go on YouTube, learn more about me. And the Peterson has its own website. So, they're easy. Both of us are easy to find. Right. Okay. No, that's fair. Yeah. All right. So we go to YouTube to find you and maybe see the interview with Leno or the other one going over your Bizzarrini. And then we can go check out the Peterson at their website, right? Yeah. And thank you, Greg. And thank you for plugging the Peterson. We appreciate all you do and all RM does too. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Bruce. You bet, and all the best. I always sign off, never lift. Keep your foot firmly on the gas. Never lift. I love that. Never lift. Okay, my friend. Thanks for listening to the Collector Car Podcast. Don't forget to give us a nice rating on iTunes and be sure to follow us on Instagram and everywhere else at the Collector Car Podcast.